of the month of Kislev, which is the day that we celebrate the continuation of yesterday, the 19th of Kislev. It's a day that we celebrate the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, his release from prison. And he was in prison because of what we're teaching today. The Tsarist government was afraid that too many people are getting inspired or whatever. Without the details of the story, he was also sending funds to Israel, and they thought that he was conspiring with the Turkish government by sending funds to Israel, where his Hasidim were living at the time, and things like that. But eventually he was freed on this day. And the reason why it's so significant is not just because he was freed from captivity in Tsarist Russia, but because by doing so, as he was told by his great saintly teachers, the Maggid, the Mezrich, and the Baal Shem Tov, that by being released, he was being absolved from a heavenly decree. In other words, it was really a heavenly decree, which was that the heavens said that you're revealing too many secrets of the Torah. You're bringing out too many secrets. And he said, and it was clear with his release. They told him, when you're going to be released, he said, should I continue to teach them? And they said, you should continue to disseminate and keep giving out these teachings as much as possible. And so it's because of this day that we're sitting here today. In addition, the 20th of Kislev today is also the day when the book of Tanya, which is the first seminal book of the Hasidic teachings from the Alter Rebbe, was published in the Russian publishing house that they had there. And it was also this day that we were first able to have these teachings that we have actually published and made available to the masses. So today is a day that we're not only studying, but we're also celebrating the day when it's possible to be having the teachings that we have today. And now for the class. So, yes.
This class can be on your website to register.
It should already be up there by archabad.org/JLI. If not, you'll see an email over the next few days, but it should already be available. Also, one more thing, that this course begins January 28th. I'm also going to be teaching for the first 2 weeks in January, for the 7th and the 14th, a mini course on Israel. And it's going to be called Israel, Facts or Fiction. And this is to clarify a lot of the information and disinformation that's going around about Israel's history, about our connection to the land, about why it's a Jewish land. We're going to go through some of the modern history from the founding from 1948. We're going to go back a little bit before that. We're going to go through the different empires that had controlled the land of Israel over the years. We're going to go through when the Jewish people were exiled from the land of Israel and when they started returning back. And all these questions that will give a lot of light to so many of the issues that are coming up, unfortunately, we have so much information thrown at us and we don't know what to believe. So I'm going to try to make it as clear as possible so that when you're confronted with someone or something, be it in person or online, and they're going to say, oh, Israel, this and this and this, and you'll be able to tell them, well, actually, this is the facts, the way it is.
And registration is also on the website.
Yes, that's going to be on the same archabad.org/facts. It's a different link. And you'll also be getting most of you should be getting as well a letter in the mail, which has all our upcoming events, and it will also be about our upcoming matching campaign, which begins as well this week on the 7th.
On tables is about the next course in this flyer.
Yeah, that's the Advice for Life course that doesn't have the Israel course though, the mini course. Okay, So now let's begin. Today's class, if the course has not yet done so, today's class is going to completely blow you away. So buckle up and get ready. But you know, we talk about the essence of everything. How can you talk about the essence of everything? Well, the truth is that you can't. Because you can't really know what the depth, what the is that everything is. Okay? Yeah? Okay. But then again, she's okay. But then again, we live in a time where anybody says anything and anybody believes anything. So maybe I could also say things that I don't understand completely about. Right? Why not? People seem to know everything about what they know nothing about. The minute there's a war in Ukraine, everybody knows everything about Ukraine. Something going on in Israel, everybody knows everything about Israel. When there's a pandemic, everybody knows everything. Everybody's a doctor. So,
Isn't that what you call a maven?
a maven, right? So we're going to talk about things that we really cannot know about, but we're also going to bring this in a very profound way and show how this is incredibly relevant to our lives. So let's begin. We talked about this, the Or Ein Sof. What does Or Ein Sof mean? Anybody know Hebrew? Where's our Hebrew speakers? Or Ein Sof. What's Ein Sof mean?
Ein Sof is infinity.
Infinity. But what does the word Ein Sof mean?
Without end.
Without end. Very good. Ein Sof means without end. So we talked about the great and lofty light, and this was on your booklet here that we went through. The lofty light, the Or Ein Sof. That was all the way up there, and as you'll notice, this map here only goes to lesson 5 and not lesson 6, and you'll soon understand why. This is called the Or Ein Sof, the infinity. But the thing is that we call it Or Ein Sof. I sometimes refer to rabbis' sermons are sometimes called the Sermon Ein Sof. But this is the light with no end. But when something has no end, notice that we're missing out in another aspect of it, which is that just because something has no end, we're still assumed that it has a beginning. And in our world, we assume that everything has a beginning, because we can only imagine things that have a beginning. But what if something doesn't have a beginning? Ein Sof means no end, limitless. But what if something doesn't have a beginning? Let's take a look at text number 1, page 177 in your book. We refer to God's light as Ein Sof without end instead of Ein Lo Tchila without a beginning. This preference appears puzzling because essentially there is no difference. Anything that has no beginning also has no end, as it is known. The truth is that if we intend to refer to God's very essence, it would indeed be appropriate to use the phrase Ein Lo Tchila, without a beginning. However, what we describe as Ein Sof is, in fact, God's light and radiance, and not God himself. To clarify, when the Kabbalists speak of the Ein Sof, their intention is the endless light God, not the light of the endless one. They are not attempting to describe the origins of the light as endless, for we cannot describe God himself as endless. What are we saying here? We're saying that there are things that are endless. You could say, for example, an angel, right? An angel lives forever. Something with no beginning. You could say things that are timeless, and therefore they must have no end. The Ein Sof extends to infinity. But the Ein Sof is a Or Ein Sof, a light of Ein Sof. A light means that it has a source of the light. The sun's light is very powerful, but the sun's light comes from the light. When we say Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God, that means that it is a light of God, which means that it's coming from a source. The question is, what is that source? And this is what we could try to explain, but is very, very difficult. And this is what we call atzmut. And this is the current key term 6.1. We're calling it the essence, but perhaps another way to translate atzmut is anything within relation of itself. Anything in relationship within itself. Meaning, once you're already going to an outside expression of oneself, you are outside of your etzem. Anything that is expressive in any sort of way, it means I am not my etzem. I'm not my very essence, my very being. Anything that's in relation with myself, with one's self, means that it is not, that does not have to be expressed in any specific way. The best way to explain it, although this is only a human explanation of it, is when a person is lying under their blankets and just sitting back, not even trying to think about anything, not thinking about what happened during your day, not thinking about the people that you've come in contact with, not thinking about the family or anything. Just being me, without anything else. Now, it's very hard to really come about that because we are constantly thinking about something that is outside of ourselves. And everything within our life is an expression that is external because that's the only way we relate to it. But think about relating to something that's you're completely within yourself. Now, when we talk about God in this way, everything ultimately turns back to God being that very identity. So you can't really separate it. And here, we're going to understand that this is why you cannot separate this in a way that is limited, and you cannot say that it's limitless, because it isn't any of the two. In other words, when we talk about God's light, the expression of God, versus Him Himself and His very essence, what is the difference? When we talk about godliness, which is what we're talking about until now, which is the Sefirot, are expressions of godliness. That's God's expression of what God is. But today we're talking about something that we can't really describe what it is, and we can't describe what it's not. It just is. It is, it was, and it always will be. So God Himself defies any description whatsoever. Let's take a look at text number 2. Like this picture here. What is it? Okay. Let's take a look at text number 2. Every title is a description, an attempt to describe something about a particular entity. It follows that the recipient of the title is an entity with a degree of definition or limitation that lends itself to description. Now, none of this is true of God's essence, and we are left without any form of name or title by which to refer to Him. Our knowledge of Atzmut is limited to the fact that He creates. Consequently, we have no way to refer to Atzmut other than to describe to Him as a creator. He has no definition whatsoever. Figure 1.1. So number 1, what we know about Atzmut is there's no description that can contain Atzmut. The Baal Shem Tov once said, I like to pray to God like a child. What do you mean praying like a child? Said, when a child asks a parent of something, for something, does the child think, my daddy's so rich, My daddy's so poor. My daddy is a doctor. My daddy is a lawyer. My daddy just is dad, right? He's not defined in any way. Rosh Hashanah said, this is how I like it. We say, Baruch Atah. Atah means you. Blessed are you. What's you? You just means you. It means there's no name for you. As later on, you're going to see there's many names for God, but the very identity of God has no explain. So there's many, that we talked about various levels and worlds and what step higher. You can't say Atzmut is a higher level than that, because Atzmut is the very identity of everything. So when you take a look at your list over here, you say, what is God's very essence? What is God's very identity? Whoops, this is upside down. It's not another level that's up here. It's everything. It's not limitless and it's not limited. It's everything. And it's none of it at the same time. It's all of it and none of it at the same time. So that's why Atzmut isn't on the map. Because any level we talked about coordinates with a spiritual latitude or longitude. It's a spiritual level. It's not up or down. But it is nowhere on the map, because it is something that is everything and nothing at the same time. It's said that this is what separates Atzmut from everything else. And that's why you can't say a beginning, because there is no beginning to something that necessarily exists. You can't ask, when did God begin? Because something that is absolute doesn't have a beginning either. Something that's an absolute existence doesn't start anywhere. Because if it starts somewhere, then it means there's no absolute existence. In other words, Atzmut is the existence unlike anything else. It's not qualitatively existent and not quantitatively existent. So this is what we're going to say, the second point here, that it necessarily exists. Atzmut is an existence that must be and has no cause. Now, what you have here on page 180 will be better understood when we get to the second half of the lesson about the lowly world and the lowly body. And we're going to understand, I'll just give you a little heads up, when we understand everything what we're going to explain here, we will understand at the end of the day why we live in this world that we do. It's going to give the answer to why of everything. Now, another point here is that when we talk about Atzmut, is that it has no rules whatsoever. Because you can't have rules if you created the rules. Because you could have created it some other way. They say that there was a camp that was going on a trip to Orlando, and they wanted to keep the kids in camp and not try and run away to Disney World. So they said, if you get caught going to Disney World, the first time it's going to be a $50 fine. And they said, if you get caught going another time, it's going to be a $100 fine for the second time going to Disney. If you get caught going a third time, it's going to be a $150 fine. So a young boy in the class raises his hand and says, how much is a season pass? So you can talk about rules. You can talk about rules, and then you can talk about rules not being in existence because inherently the rules were defined by the one that had created those rules. Now there are rules of life. There are rules that you can't deny. Pi is a ratio of the circle circumference, 3.14, blah, blah, blah. 2 plus 2 equals 4. These are rules of life. You can't argue with them. They're facts. But they're facts because they're rules that were created within this realm that we live in. Within the realm of time and space that was created, these rules exist. So until now we've discussed infinity versus finitude. We talked about the creation of Biyah, the different worlds of Biyah. We talked about, and in that world, God is also finite. We talked about Ein Sof, which is God being unlimited. But when we talk about Atzmut, which is God's very identity, very essence, so infinity in itself is also limited. By limiting it to infinity, you're also saying that it has to be limited to being unlimited. That itself is also a limit. Right?
One more time.
By saying something is unlimited, you are limiting it. Because you're saying it can only be unlimited. So how do you limit something? Huh? What do you say? You put an end to it, then it's limited, then it's not limited, right?
Then you try to describe something, fix the title and name to it, you're limited.
Exactly. So, by saying something is unlimited, you're also limiting it by saying that it can't be limited. Unless you say that something is not limited by being unlimited. Let's take a look at text number 3. What's the name of that toy that says to infinity and beyond? The Toy Story. Buzz Lightyear, right? He says to infinity and beyond. Like you say to infinity and beyond, right? In truth, let's say text number 3. In truth, even infinity does not express atzmut. Rather, God's essence is neither finite nor infinite. The qualities of infinity and finitude. Page 184, text number 3. In truth, we'll read again. In truth, even infinity does not express atzmut. Rather, God's essence is neither finite nor infinite. The qualities of infinity and finitude apply exclusively to divine revelation. So you can't say that God is exclusively infinite, and He merely creates the finite world, because that is paradoxical. Because you're saying that God is creating a finite world, but He is infinity. So in other words, God is not limited to infinity because He could create a finite world. So we talked about Ein Sof has the ability to be limited. How do we say? We talked about the concept of tzimtzum. Remember that? Tzimtzum. That's a way of limiting something. Now, here we're saying something entirely different. We're not saying that the unlimited has to find within itself the ability to be limited. We're saying that the very identity of being unlimited is not really unlimited, because that's actually limiting you. This is what we call, and I know this sounds crazy, because we cannot imagine something, because we live in a finite world. The only thing we can imagine is either being finite or infinite. You can't imagine both at one time. But I will give you soon an example of something that was. Let's first take a look at this term. 6.2. Nimna ha-nimna'ot. It is impossible to ascribe an impossibility to atzmut. Nimna ha-nimna'ot. The impossibility of the impossible. Now, there was a physical expression of this in the world. And that was in the holiest place in the world. Where's the holiest place in the world? Jerusalem. Keep going. Within Jerusalem. The Holy Temple and the Holy of Holies. Very good. Now, what was so unique about the Holy of Holies? I mean, it was chosen to be God's place. You know, God, the holiest place, the Kohen Gadol only goes in there once a year. But in that very place, in the Holy of Holies, was actually you're able to see this concept of being both limited and unlimited at the very same time. This is the ark. The ark was 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits. That was the size of the ark. The size of the room that it was in, the Holy of Holies, was 20 cubits. Now, when you went inside and you measured 10 cubits to 10 cubits, and the measurement of in other words, when you measure the 2.5 cubits out of 20 cubits, so what should have happened was it would be minus 20 cubits minus 2.5. So it should only be 17.5. But actually when you measured it, it came out 10 and 10.
Because it exists, but it doesn't exist.
It exists, but it doesn't exist. Exactly. Now, I never measured it, of course, I was never there. But this is what the Talmud tells us. This is what happened. This is what the Talmud tells us. And this is why the Holy of Holies was an expression of God's very essence, of God's very identity. And why is this important? Because the Kohen Gadol went in this place on Yom Kippur. Once a year on Yom Kippur. And we're soon going to learn that the very concept of Yom Kippur is about this very thing. And we're soon going to see why.
The cubit is 18 inches, by the way.
Thank you.
See, I just thought it was the carpenter who just finished measuring and didn't measure 3 times before he left. Before he built. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Now again, I've never been there. I never measured it, but this is what the Talmud tells us.
What's the physical conversion between a cubit and measurement?
He just said 18 inches. 18 inches to a cubit. So how many feet would this be? Where's our mathematicians? How many feet would it be? 30 feet? Okay, thank you. So this is the idea of atzmut. Atzmut defies rules. It's the source of rules, and therefore is not limited to the rules as well. Now, this may seem like an irrelevant philosophical musing. However, this is very, very relevant to our lives every single day. And I'm going to explain to you why. When you talk about making the rules, God making the rules, let's take a look at text number 4. The Medrash says, page 186. From the start of the universe's creation, God foresaw the deeds of the righteous and the deeds of the wicked. As it is stated, God knows the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked that is doomed. This was represented in the start of the creation as follows. The earth was chaotic and desolate. This refers to the deeds of the wicked. Right? This is a text that we talked about, the tohu. Remember tohu? Refers to the deeds of the wicked. God declared, let there be light. This refers to the deeds of the righteous. However, the narrative has yet to clarify the genre of deeds that God desires. Is it of these or those? This is clarified in the following verse. God saw that the light was good. Clearly, God desires the deed of the righteous and does not desire the deeds of the wicked. Now, this sounds very strange. What do you mean? He wasn't sure which one he wanted, the good one or the bad one. And so therefore, finally, God said, okay, he saw the light is good, so he saw that, yeah, I want the deeds of the righteous, not of the wicked. And what kind of statement is that? Of course you want the deeds of the righteous. Isn't that what you want? But the truth is that it only becomes what's good to be chosen because this is what God says what's good. Which is in general a good lesson in life. Because here you have, just as a side note, everybody claiming that their way is right. You know, Hamas is claiming that they're righteous. So, how are you going to prove that they're not? And the answer is that you have to ultimately, at the end of the day, if you want proper morals, you have to look at what the Torah tells you is proper righteous morals. Because otherwise, everyone can decide that whatever they do is right. You know, the Nazis claim what they did was moral. So, who decides what's right and wrong? And the answer is that God gives us a Torah with the guidelines of what is right and wrong. And when you pervert those guidelines, that is when you have this fight between the good and evil. And this is what God says, I am choosing this to be right. And that's why, together with this also comes Bichira Chavshis. Bichira Chavshis means a choice that originates completely from within the chooser and not compelled even in the slightest by any external consideration. If you're going to the store and you're buying a car because one has certain gadgets and you want those gadgets, or you want it to be whatever, gas versus electric or whatever it is, that's not free choice. That's a choice based on certain guidelines that you're creating for yourself. Free choice means when there is nothing that is compelling you to make that choice for any reason. And when God chooses good, it's because this is what God is choosing, not because anything is compelling that or trying to make it in any specific way. So God is in a certain way allowing human beings to have this godly power, which is free choice. And God says, the only difference is, God says, I am giving you a guideline to try and follow that way, but you still have 100% free choice whether or not you want to follow it. That's the only difference. So when you talk about free choice, Bechira Chavshis, this is coming from a place that is that is of true divine essence. And so that's why there could be bad in the world, because God allows human beings to have full free choice. So, number 4, the fourth thing that we learn about Atzmut has absolute free choice. Atzmut chose to desire good over evil. And we also have that ability to make that choice. And now we're starting to see slowly but surely how things are very relevant from this idea of atzmut, which seems to be completely incomprehensible, but actually God created man in his image also in an incomprehensible way. So now, everything that we have, whatever has been decided, we have to follow that way. You got to follow the boss. If the boss hires you to sell socks and you say, I'm better at selling suits, well, this was the boss's choice to sell the socks. Once he made that choice, you follow it. The same thing, once God gave the guidelines and says, this is good and this is evil, this is the way that you got to follow. But he's giving you 100% free choice to not follow that if you choose not to. But he does give the guideline and say, this is what I chose. I chose good to be this. This is the direction of good. Now it's up to you whether or not you want to make that decision and follow the good or not. That is the next thing, number 4, which you take from the concept of atzmut. So number 1, we said atzmut has no definition whatsoever. Number 2, we said it's the only entity that necessarily exists, that has to exist and doesn't have a beginning. Number 3, follows no rules whatsoever because it is the source of all rules. And number 4, it is the only entity that has absolute free choice. And now we're going to take this a step further. Remember I said that the concept of atzmut is very much connected with the Holy of Holies? and that it was the one day the Kohen Gadol would go in the Holy of Holies was which day? Yom Kippur. You know why these two are very much interconnected? Because that is actually the very concept of Atzmut. Why? Because we talked about God being the one to choose to make the rules. What if you break the rules? What if you don't follow the right way? Well, God does something that again is completely incomprehensible. And that is called forgiveness or repentance. Text number 5, page 188. Nothing stands in the way of teshuvah, repentance. Even if one denied God's existence throughout their life and then repented in their final moments, they merit a portion in the world to come. How does this make any sense? Did everything wrong your whole life and then you do repentance and God says, you're still welcome in? Text number 6. Violations of the divine will are felt most keenly by the divine author who scripted that will. On the other hand, God transcends his own will and is not compelled to react to violations in a particular way, for who can tell him what you are doing? Ecclesiastes. Consequently, through teshuvah, which is loftier than all the mitzvot, and which touches the innermost depth of God's desire, one can attain atonement. So what are we pointing out here? The irony and the paradox here is the boss makes the rules. Everyone is beholden to the rules. Everyone has to follow the rules. The boss in the company is the one who decides it has to be, right? Is that the way business works? Now, what happens if someone messes up? You go to the HR, thank you. You go to HR, and they tell you, well, sorry, you broke the rules. You'll have to be suspended. Or they give you another chance. And then you go to the company, and the boss says, don't worry about it. It's good. You're good to go. But you just made the rules and you said, this is what you got to follow, and now you're letting him go? That's the boss. That's why it's good to be a boss. You can make the rules and you can change the rules. So, the same way that we're saying that God chose something to be in a specific manner, in a specific way, that very same way, God also has the ability to say, you can do teshuvah and be forgiven for anything that you did, and you're still very much connected with me. So 5, it is a source of the atonement granted when we do teshuvah. And now, we understand as well why the greatest expression of this was where? In the physically, where? Which place? In the Holy of Holies. Because the Holy of Holies is where the Kohen Gadol went on Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. Day of Atonement is the day of Nimna HaNimnaot, which is a term that we used before, which means what? Nimna HaNimnaot, remember that? How do we translate it here? The impossibility of the impossible. That is what Yom Kippur is. Yom Kippur says I did everything wrong, but that could be wiped away. Something that makes no sense. It doesn't make sense. If I wrote something with a permanent marker, then it can't be erased. And suddenly God says, even though you can't erase it, it's erased. How can you take away something that was done? You can't take away something. But Tshuva says, no, I'm going to change the past. How can you change the past? Because when you're talking about a God that's not limited about the future or the past, the future and the past is the same, then you could change the past.
That's the ultimate free choice.
That's the ultimate free choice, which is the other aspect that we brought out here.
It's not making a wrong or right.
Again, when God is the one that said that this is right and this is wrong, and God also said that even if you followed the wrong path, you could still get on the right path, and whatever you did wrong could now become good. That's the incredible power of teshuvah. Again, doesn't make any sense, but we know that's what exists. Now, as we've explained and illustrated in the previous lessons, we are a reflection of the entire Seder Hishtalshelut, the human makeup. So the truth is that we have, as well, this identity that God put within the world. So we said, the levushim, which is the garments. You have this in your little paper here. The garments fit to what? This was all the way back to lesson 1. Who remembers that? 6 weeks ago. Bria, Yitzira, Asiya was actually 7 weeks ago. Thought, speech, and action. Then number 2 came the kochot, which we called the sefirot, the 10 sefirot. Then we had the ratzon, the keter, the pleasure, desire. And then we had the parallel sets of tohu, which is the ones that did not come together. They were just parallel with each other. They couldn't line up properly. And then we talked about tzimtzum, being the ability to bring that about. Now we talked about atzmut. Where do you find that in this order of human existence? So this is a term that we call yechida. So this is a new term you're going to learn, yechida. Yechida means the oneness. It's the essence of the soul that is inexorably united with God. Yechida means oneness. It's one. There are 5 levels of the neshama. Nefesh, of the soul. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. Now is not a class specifically on the lessons of the soul. We're going to see that soon a little bit more. But nefesh is the very basic physical aspects of the body. It's our ability to eat, to sleep, to move. Ruach is the spirit, which is more connected with the emotions. Neshama is more associated with the intellectual. Chaya is connected with our ratzon, with our desire, with our tainug, enjoyment. And then we have Yechida. Yechida is the oneness, which is everything that's one. We talked about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. What is something that we do on Yom Kippur that we don't do any other time of the year? We don't eat. Correct. There's other times that we fast. There's one thing that we do on Yom Kippur that is not done any other day of the year. It is a prayer that is recited. I mean, there's other things as well, but there's a prayer that's recited only once a year. It is called, anyone knows? Ne'ilah. Ne'ilah prayer, right? It's recited only once a year. That means it's the 5th prayer of the day. It's the only day that we recite a 5th prayer. Why? Because this prayer, Ne'ilah, is connected to the Yechida, to the 5th level of the Neshama, which we only obtain on Yom Kippur. The 4th level, Tainug, enjoyment, we were able to obtain that on Shabbos and holidays, which is why there's a 4th prayer on Shabbos and holidays. But the one day that we only say a 5th prayer is only on Yom Kippur.
Must the teshuvah, should it be accompanied by deeds, or is a word enough in and of itself?
I'll give you a Jewish answer. Yes and no. It needs to be accompanied by deeds. However, the day of Yom Kippur itself atones. Just the very day atones. Even if you did nothing, it atones. Now, of course, there are exceptions. It's only between. It doesn't atone for things between man and man that you have to. But without getting into specifics, in general, the day itself atones. Now, to be more specific, to really be affected personally, internally, to be able to change yourself and to bring that down, to allow yourself to be changed. So for that, you got to work on it. You have to do teshuvah. But in theory, not in theory, but in its real identity, every Jew is atoned the day of Yom Kippur, which is why you find people showing up that never show up any other time of the year. Text number 7. Oh, here. So you have Atzmut, Yechida, and Teshuvah. These all three are connected. Together, the Jewish people and God form one complete entity, so to speak. This is due to the bond between the very essence of the soul and God's essence. By contrast, with the soul's various expressions and powers also enjoy a relationship. While the soul's various expressions and powers also enjoy a relationship with God, the relationship is susceptible to damage as a consequence of the person's choices. The soul's essence is always intimately bound and united with God in a unity that our sages depict as merged and bounded with you in oneness to be with you. So, this is the soul that pushes the person to do teshuvah. A person could have strayed from afar. A person could have gone to the greatest distance. Recently I saw a video. I talked about this in Shul. And this is one of hundreds, maybe thousands of such things. A guy covered in tattoos from top to bottom. And he makes a video of himself, as many are going around, and he says, I have a message for Hamas. My parents, he talked about his parents, being survivors or whatever, and he said, I am going to now keep my Jewish identity just because of what you're doing. And how many people have awoken to their Jewish identity in the last few weeks? And you ask why? It really doesn't make sense. Because when we're most threatened, shouldn't that be a time when you want to hide? And people are saying, no, I want to show who I am. I'm going to proudly wear my Star of David. There's even a campaign to get non-Jews to put menorahs in their windows. But why? It doesn't make sense. And the answer is because we have a yechida, we have a level of our soul that is intimately connected with God, that says, no matter what, I am not defined by what I do that makes me who I am. Right? Again, I am not defined by what I do that makes me who I am. And then when it comes moments like this, where our very identity is being threatened, at that point you say, sorry, it's not happening. I'm going to show you who I am. I'm not going to be afraid of it. How many Jews began to keep Shabbos, to do mitzvahs, just to show it doesn't make sense? And this is what Atzmus is. It's the soul connection. This is number 6 of Atzma. Atzma is connected to and parallels the deepest parts of our soul, the Yechidah. And this is why it comes moments we can't really explain it. All we know is that there's something within us that says, I am not allowing my very being, my very essence to be threatened. And that's Atzmut. Now we're going to go back to our buddy with the video.
Welcome to our final episode of the World Kabbalah. The mystical system stretches like a ladder. In our first episode, we began at its lowest rung and we climbed upward from there. So, before we hit the climax, let's recap our previous steps. Lesson 1. we met the three basic layers of God's creation that range from terra firma to the spiritual extreme. Catholics call them three worlds of created and well. Lesson 2. We rose beyond creation to meet the divine world of Atzilut, home to the Sefirot. The divinity of Atzilut is stamped with the limitations of defined characteristics. We cannot relate to such powerful divinity, but we can connect with its variety of characteristics. Lesson 3. We soared beyond Atzilut to meet Keter. That's a leap from divinity with limitations to God's infinite light. It's difficult for us to relate to God's infinity, but we learned why the infinite light is indispensable for our limited world. Lesson 4. We hit the peak of our ladder and discovered a debris field of a cosmic mystical explosion. During the pre-birth of creation, the intense but chaotic spiritual layer known as Tohu imploded, the effects of which still impact our reality today. Lesson 5. We met the ultimate mystery of creation. How does anything but infinity emerge from God's infinite light? That's where we discovered Tzimtzum, the cosmic process of contracting and concealing divine light to facilitate the emergence of all layers of existence. That was some ride. So what's missing? Well, we've discussed God's creation, its system, purpose, and relevance. We've also discussed God's transcendent divinity, but we haven't discussed God himself. There's a reason for that. God is off the charts. We plotted a path from the foot of the mystical system, that's us, all the way to the greatest divine revelation. But God's self, or Atzmut, the essence, that's beyond any revelation, description, or definition. God transcends all logic and rules, which are merely his own creations. So here's today's surprise. That's exactly what makes God himself most relevant. Why is that? Here's one reason. God designed us in his own image, which means that he gave us the ability, not provided to the rest of the rule-abiding system, to break the divine rules. And we do. We mess up. But where do we go from there? The system works by the book. We threw out the book, so the system won't let us back in. Thankfully, God himself, at his essence, is not bound by the rules he authored. He is free to revise or override at will. And God chose to connect our deepest core, the very essence of our soul, to his own essence. How does that help us? Because our desire to repair our relationship with God after messing up springs from our deepest self. It's the voice of our innermost soul. So when we reach into our deepest self to return to God's embrace, God does the same. He overrides his own system to provide us clemency and atonement. Our sincerity cuts through the cosmos, and God's reciprocating love cuts through his infinite light, the Tzimtzum, Tohu, Keter, Atzilut, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiya to us. Now, if that's not absolutely relevant, nothing is.
Now, we're going to tie everything together. And we will completely blow you away. Because what we're going to learn now is that, as crazy as it sounds, this is as crazy as who we are. So all the levels of Seder Hishtalshalut that we discussed, Atzmos is actually the one that is most relevant of them all. Take a moment to appreciate the irony of the fact that the entity that defies any description whatsoever is actually the one that is most relevant to us. Firstly, in a general sense, by now it's clear and ultimate, the source of everything, and the ultimate understanding of the place and purpose of anything in creation, and the ultimate cause of, and God is the ultimate cause of anything that we have in creation. But what we're also going to learn now is not that God is only the purpose and the entity of creation, but that the greatest connection to God's very essence is this lowest world that we live in, the world of Asiya. The one that looks on the list all the way in the bottom of the list, the Asiya Gashmis, the physical world, that one actually is most connected to God's very divine essence. So you say that doesn't make any sense. Well, I'll soon explain to you why. Chassidus points out that as ridiculous as it sounds, here in this physical world we share a very common quality with Atzmos. Let's take a look at text number 7. The difference between the upper spiritual world and this material world of ours is that only the inhabitants of our material world experience their existence as entirely independent of any source. This is the difference between light and created being. Light points to a source. When we see light, its existence informs us that there must be a source of light. By contrast, a material creature does not indicate the existence of the Creator. In fact, it actively conceals God's existence by projecting itself as an utterly independent existence. Only logic demonstrates the incorrectness of this natural perception. In truth, our existence is entirely dependent on God, and it is only our perception that generates a sense of independence. Nevertheless, the very fact that we imagine ourselves to be self-generated is because our source is Atzmut, the absolutely independent existence. And this is what we call, in the term in your term sheet, key term number 6.5, Yesh Me'ayin. Yesh Me'ayin, which we translate something from nothing. Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing, which is the creation of an entity that does not intuitively sense and respect its source. But the question is, if we aren't something from nothing, we're actually nothing from something. Because something from nothing applies that if God is our creator, then it's nothing. It should be the opposite. We say we're actually a nothing coming from God that is a something. But yet, it's referred to as a something from nothing. Why is this? Let's take a look at text number 9. The created entity is considered like nothing before Him, meaning it has no independent existence and is therefore utterly nullified before God. Nevertheless, that is only before Him in God's perception as viewed with the truth that is available exclusively above. However, the perception from below, i.e. the created being's perception, is that is an entirely independent creation. This is because the energy that flows into a created entity is not understood or experienced by the entity at all. This is why we refer to creation as something from nothing. It's basically saying the ultimate truth versus our perception. So the ultimate truth is, yes, we are nothing from something. But in our perception, God allows it to be in a way that we are a something that seems to come from nothing. So you have nothing from something. Nothing from something, meaning the world that we have is really nothing coming from the ultimate existence, which is God. But we call it something from nothing. Why? Because God allows us to perceive it in that way. And now, let's take a look at how does this actually come about. So how can you have an identity that doesn't at all see its existence where it comes from? Everything has to know, this is where I come from. But yet when it comes to the physical creation, I mean, you have scientists that are constantly trying to figure out, where does this come from, where does this come from, where does that come from? But ultimately, you're not able to really explain it. You could explain the what, but there's always going to be a point where you get stuck and say, this is as far as I can go. So we are an independent existence that does not see its source. Take a look at text number 10. The very essence of the Creator, the ultimate independent existence that has no antecedent, did I pronounce that right? Antecedent antecedent, or cause at all. He alone has an exclusive power and ability to create an entity from absolutely and total nothingness, to the extent that the created entity senses that it has no cause or antecedent at all. Text number 7. I'm sorry. Figure 6.7. 6.7, number 7.
Page 197.
Page 197, yeah. So that's what I meant. A lot of 7s in there. Okay, solely possesses the power to create entities that feel independent of their divine origin. This is Atzmut. Atzmut has the ability to create an entity that feels independent, that doesn't see where its source comes from. Nothing else is able to create something and say that it cannot explain where it comes from. Now we're going to take this a step further. A step further. Text number 11. Listen to this very carefully. The soul is a product of the divine light, which is itself merely an expression of divinity. Conversely, the body is created directly by God's essence, whose existence is absolutely independent and has no preceding cause or antecedent at all. The soul recognizes that the body contains the above superiority because it longs to gain similar advantage. It desires to bond with the body and its animalistic soul and to guide them through a positive spiritual transformation. You hear what we're saying here? What we're saying here is, if I were to ask you before we began the course, or even before we began this lesson, what is higher, the body or the soul? What would you tell me? The soul's higher. Wrong. The body is higher. The body is actually where the soul wants to connect to in order to reach its ultimate potential. Because the body, the soul, you're able to see the soul's connection to its godly source. The body is a completely independent source. And it's specifically with the body that you're able to see this expression of atzmut, the idea that it is a completely independent existence. And that's why, going back to scientists have no explanation. Every time without fail, we had Kanai Nahara 8 kids. Every time without fail, right after the baby's born, Khani looks at the baby and says, "It's such a miracle." There's no way to explain how does this body come about, right? There's no way to explain it, and yet it's a created being coming from parents that is a completely independent being, and God gives this power to the human being specifically, and specifically to the body. And scientists try to understand the body and they try to dissect it, and how do you explain a heart that's pumping for 70, 80 years straight, but you can't get a machine to run 5 minutes? But,
did something with that, so that's another show.
okay. Yes.
It sounds like God simply gifts us with self-consciousness.
100%. Absolutely.
That was-
Go away. God is gifting us with self-consciousness. God is saying, I am creating a being that most reflects who I am. What's God? God is a being that is not dependent or defined by any other existence. And God says, I am going to create this matching being, which man has created in the image of God, this matching being, which is an independent existence that doesn't know or see its source and could feel completely independent. And that is more keenly connected to our body more than our soul. Because the soul, you say, this is a godly thing, spiritual thing, but our body is a completely independent being. How do you have a being that's completely independent and does not at all connect to its source? Answer is, it could only be with the very identity that is an independent identity, not associated with any other source. And that's God's very existence, God's very essence. Yeah? Is that mind-blowing?
Yeah, totally.
And now, we're going to learn Now we already are beginning to understand, I should say, why we're living in this lowly world. Text number 12. The end is wedged in the beginning, and the beginning in the end. Those who sing the Lechadodi, we say, Sof ma'aseh machashava techila. You remember that? No. Yes. Okay, we got one yes. Sof ma'aseh machashava techila, which means the beginning and the end are connected. Like if you're building a house, your very original thought for that house is expressed when the entire house is built. Not by the blueprints come, not when the construction comes, when the entire house is finished. That is the connection to the very original beginning, the very original source. God's ultimate edifice, this ultimate house that he wanted to build for himself, is this world, this physical world. And this is what we call a dira b'tachtonim. God having a existence, a home in the lowly realms. Text number 13. This is a bit of a long text, but let's read through it. There's an old statement of our sages that God created this world to enable the fulfillment of his desire for an abode in the lowest realm. Now there is no higher or lower in God's presence because he fills every realm of existence equally. Rather, the description of our world as the lowest realm can be understood by first appreciating that before the creation of the universe, all that existed was God himself. The very space that the universe now occupies was entirely filled with God's presence. In fact, that remains the reality even now from the truth of God's perspective. The change caused by creation is only in the perspective of the recipients of God's vivifying energy because they receive this by way of multiple screens that dim and conceal God's light from their perspective. This concealing process is referred to as the hishtalshalut of the worlds, meaning their devolution from each other via interlinked, progressively dimmer realities by way of countless steps of concealment of the divine light and energy. This continues all the way until the creation of this physical, corporeal, tangible world of ours, the bottom of the entire chain. There is no lower realm in terms of the concealment of God's light. It is a world of incredible darkness to the extent that it is filled with klipot and the opposite of God in actuality, and claim that nothing exists beyond their immediate reality. The goal of this entire chain of interlinked realms of spiritual existence and the purpose of their progressively steeper descents in terms of the divine concealment is not for any of those spiritual worlds. Rather, the purpose is to arrive at this lowly, tangible world, for it was God's original desire to derive pleasure from mortal efforts to suppress the forces of evil and to transform the darkness into light until God's infinite light shines openly through the entirety of this world, the vast habitat of ultimate darkness and the forces that oppose sanctity. It's worthwhile to read that again, but we don't have the time. So this is what we call dira b'tachtonim, God's desire to have a home in this world fashioned by our doing mitzvahs. And that is why God wants us to have his very essence, his very identity in this home. And this is number 8 in your figure 6.8. God desires a home in this physical world. Asmos desires to be revealed in our world through human effort and transform darkness into light. Which is why we find that when we open up the Torah, which is God's telling us, this is my will, which is the words of Torah, God telling us this is my will. You open it up, and it sounds so very basic, I guess you could say, very down to earth. Take a look at the 10 Commandments. You have some that are, I am the Lord your God, have no other idols, keep the Shabbat. Then you have things that are so basic. Don't kill, don't steal. Be honest. Honor your father or mother. And every single mitzvah that God tells us in the Torah, it's all associated with our physical world. You could say, people tell me I'm a cardio Jew. What is a cardio Jew? I feel God in my heart. And what do I say? But that's not, God is not looking for cardio Jews. I mean, there's one mitzvah that says to love your God. But aside for that, God says, yes, love your God. Then what does it immediately say? Bind them on your arm and put them between your eyes. It's a film that we wear. And put them on your doorposts and put up the mezuzah. These are physical objects. The Torah scroll is a physical object. The Shabbat candles is a physical object. Everything that we have in the Torah is all associated with physical objects, things that we eat. Matzah on Passover. Is this freedom? Eating a physical piece of cracker, that's freedom? But God says no, right? But God says this is how you express your freedom, through eating this piece of matzah. Everything that God tells us is all associated with the physical realm. Why is it? Because God is saying, you are going to bring down God's ultimate purpose in the physical world that you live in. Everything within the physical world has its ability to express God's purpose. From a blade of grass that grows. How many mitzvahs, now not a lot of them are not, we don't do today because a lot of them have to do with Israel and the land, and we're not all farmers. How many mitzvahs are associated with the land, with farming, giving tithing, tzedakah? When you give tzedakah, you're elevating your entire business. So you say, God says, why does God want me to schlep and do business and do work, which seems to be meaningless? And the answer is, when you're doing tzedakah, you're elevating your entire business through that physical funds that you're giving, or others that you may be inspiring or meeting or whatever. But the point is, everything that we have in the Torah is all associated with this physical world. Why? Because this is where the ultimate purpose is about. Self-maseh machshava tchila. Whatever is in the end, in the action, that's associated with the original machshava, which is the original thought. So, and final thoughts regarding atzmus. In the course of our discussion, we mentioned that there's so many different levels, and some that may be very difficult to understand or to reach. But it's actually the one that is most incomprehensible, the most that's inconceivable, that actually is mostly connected with us being in this physical realm. Let's read text number 14. It's actually from my Yom Yom from 2 days ago. Whom do I have in heaven? I desire nothing with you on earth. The love of God expressed in this verse is to crave nothing at all other than God alone, not even the heavens or the earth. Metaphors for the higher and lower levels of paradise. Instead, all of one's love is reserved for God's very essence and self, to the exclusion of all else. When the master teacher Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, who we mentioned was freed from prison today, when he enters a state of rapturous bonding with God, he was often heard to exclaim, I want nothing at all. I don't want your Garden of Eden. I don't want your world to come. All I want is you. Many people say, what's going to be how do I go to heaven? And the answer is, it's not about heaven. You read the entire Torah. Yes, we believe in going in the future, and the soul's future, and the soul going to a higher place, and the soul's eternity, and all that. You read the Torah, there's nothing about that in the Torah. Why? Because God is saying, ultimately, I want you to do it here. In this physical world, the entire Torah is about what you do physically here, because that's what the ultimate purpose is. This is my plan. This is my house. This is my place. God gives us a soul that is able to live in this world for however long God gives us. And on that journey, the soul could accomplish only what it could with the help of the body together. And that's why we need that body. By the way, just a side note, this is obviously not a part of this, but this is one of the reasons that it's so important to treat the body properly after its passing. And not to dispose of the body in any inappropriate ways, but to give it a proper Jewish burial. Because the body is actually the one that's fulfilling God's mission in this world, in certain ways more than the soul is. Which is why it's so important to give the body a proper Jewish burial. Anyway, this is the power of mitzvot. Everything that we do is physical. Tzedakah, tefillin, Shabbat candles, mezuzah. These are all things that are in this physical world. We're not going to do the song. We're going to do this.
Lesson 6. The essence of everything.
The background music. Sorry. Not sure what happened there. I don't know how to turn it off. All right. But by the way, these songs, there is a song for every lesson, and you could listen to them online. We just simply didn't have the time
The essence of everything.
in each class.
1. Everything that exists in the infinite spiritual states and worlds, from the Orain Saf to Tahu and Tikkun to Keter to Atzilut and Bia, exists for one purpose: the fulfillment of God's desire to have a home in this world. Atzmat will be revealed. This home for God is fashioned by our doing mitzvot. 2. Despite the loftiness of the various worlds and levels of Seder Ishtashalut, we ought not be distracted or tempted by any of them. We should desire Atzmut alone.
So with this, we're going to conclude our course. I want to tell you, first of all, again, thank you for everyone who joined. Go to myjli.com/Kabbalah to see more. And keep exploring, keep learning. And I want to as well suggest to start to learn the book of Tanya. The book of Tanya is a seminal book of Chabad Hasidus teachings. And there is a schedule that was put together to be able to study it